Welcome back to another episode of Shifty's 49ers Talk. It's your boy Shifty coming at you with another one. Today we are going to do my third and final mock offseason, full offseason. We're talking trades, free agency, the draft, the whole thing. It's going to be a long video. So without further ado, let's get into it. In this mock offseason, the moves that will be made will be based on two things. Number one, of course, the moves that I would like us to make, and number two will be the moves that I think could very well happen. Now, as you guys know, I always like to keep things very realistic. So one of the things that we have to address is the elephant in the room. The first thing that we're going to get out of the way is the Jimmy Garoppolo trade. It's no secret he's going to get traded. We've had multiple quarterbacks get traded in recent days. We now have Deshaun Watson being cleared of allegations or what have you. He's now very much on the quarterback market. But ultimately, I think Jimmy Garoppolo will get traded to the Indianapolis Colts. I think it's a trade that will make sense for both teams. You know, Jimmy Garoppolo has a very impressive record as a starting quarterback, 31-14, I believe. That's what the Colts need to do. Chris Ballard and Frank Reich, they got to start winning some more games, getting to the playoffs. I believe Jimmy Garoppolo with that roster in Indianapolis can very much do that. Plus, they still, even after acquiring Jimmy, will have a ton of cap space and some decent draft capital to work with in the future years. So what would the trade look like? Well, to me, it would be Jimmy Garoppolo plus our 102nd overall pick, which is end of the third round, the compensatory pick that we got from Mike McDaniel, and that will be traded for the Colts' 73rd overall pick, the Colts' 82nd overall pick, which are both third rounders, and I believe we would get a 2023 third round pick that could move up to a second based on if the Colts make the playoffs, Jimmy plays a certain number of snaps, something to that effect. Now, of course, just like I mentioned, Garoppolo would bring some decent stability to the Colts. He's very much a winner. He will get the most out of that roster. And also, the Colts are still free in a year or two to maybe draft their quarterback of the future. Acquiring Jimmy would not prevent that. For the 49ers, of course, we move on from Garoppolo. We usher in the Trey Lance era. We clear $25.5 million off the cap, and we officially hand the reins over, and it's going to be Trey area in the Bay Area. The next aspect that I want to talk about are going to be players who are currently under contract with the 49ers who will be receiving extensions. So the first guy I got to say and do is going to be Nick Bosa. He is in line for a huge contract extension. We just saw Max Crosby get a big extension with the Las Vegas Raiders, and I think Nick Bosa is in line for something quite significantly higher than that. To me, I'm not a capologist. I'm not, an expert or anything like that. But what I do want to say is I think he probably gets about a 5-year extension, probably in the realm of about $150 million with 100 and something guaranteed. So biggest contract probably for a defensive player, but Bosa is absolutely worth it. He is the best player on the defense, and he just changes opposing offenses' game plans. He just wrecks the game in so many different ways. Of course, he's an amazing pass rusher, also credible against the run, and love Nick Bosa. The next guy that we're going to talk about then is going to be Deebo Samuel, the wide receiver or wide back, whatever you want to call him. Man, he is just a machine. He's a force. He was the focal point of the offense. He does everything. The amount of huge plays he had last season was insane. He is absolutely someone that you have to keep around to help build the team, especially with like an up and coming quarterback like a Trey Lance. But yeah, he's just phenomenal. So can't say enough about Deebo Samuel. Probably a 5-year extension with pretty big money too. Got to make that happen. The next two guys and the last two guys in this section that I want to talk about, first is going to be cornerback Emmanuel Moseley, someone who I think in NFL circles is certainly underrated. 49er fans know just how good he is. When he was on the field last year, he was really, really solid. Just someone that he's a very, very good number 2 cornerback. I don't think he's quite at the level of being a number 1 cornerback in the NFL, but he's a guy who doesn't miss tackles, which is huge for this defense. Very physical, makes the right plays, comes up with turnovers. So I really like Emmanuel Moseley. I think this will be probably about a 3-year extension, which would actually reduce his cap hit this year. And then the last guy we're going to talk about in this segment is going to be edge rusher Samson Ebukam. I think this would be about a 2-year extension, which, similar to Emmanuel Moseley, would actually drop his cap hit this year, which is definitely needed considering our cap situation. But he's someone who really came on towards the end of the year. In the playoffs in the last couple of weeks, he was getting after the quarterback, so that's really good to see. Initially, it seemed like he was struggling somewhat, like the first almost half of the year he was sporadically making plays, but like towards the end of the year he was consistently in the backfield. You were hearing his name called a lot in those big games, so great to see, and I think he will help alleviate some of the losses that we're going to for sure have this offseason. The next segment that we're going to talk about is going to be pretty short and sweet. It's going to be restructuring the contracts of a couple of players. Who are those players? Well, we're talking Arik Armstead first of all, and then George Kittle. So those guys, by restructuring their contracts, we would actually save about $17.5 million on our cap. So that's really, really important for a team like the 49ers, who are in somewhat of a conundrum with our cap space, to say the least. Now, what is restructuring a contract? Well, what that is essentially is when you convert a portion of their base salary, you put it into a signing bonus, and then that gets prorated over the course of the remaining years on the contract. So you're essentially spreading out that money later on. Now, typically you only want to do this when you have players who are still relatively young, who are still productive, and you believe will remain at that same level of productivity through the rest of their contract, because it essentially guarantees everything later on. I think Arik Armstead and George Kittle both absolutely meet that criteria. So I think it's a move that makes a lot of sense for the 49ers, and then of course for the players too. Now we're going to talk about the free agents who I think the 49ers would look to bring back for the 2022 season and beyond. One of my main offseason priorities has always been bringing back Laken Tomlinson. A number of people in the media, 49ers beat writers, believe that he's going to move on, that he might not be worth it. Well, I certainly disagree. I think that Laken Tomlinson, if you bring him back on, let's say, a 4-year deal, that's anywhere from like $8 to $12 million per year. I think that's well worth it. To me, the biggest key in having a successful offensive line is just having that, of course, knowledge of the offense and just straight up talent, which I think Laken has, but just having that consistency year in and year out. I think the best offensive lines always stick together for a long time, so you kind of know what all the other guys are going to do. Now, he's developed great chemistry with Trent Williams to his left. I think he did really solid next to the veteran Alex Mack to his right. And at the end of the day, this would really set up Trey Lance to be successful in the NFL, having a strong, good offensive line that knows where it needs to be and how it can take on things like defensive, like stunts and blitzes and all that other stuff. So I think bringing back Laken Tomlinson is a huge move that we really shouldn't overlook. I don't think you can just plug in a rookie. I don't think you can plug in free agent A, B, or C. I think bringing back Laken Tomlinson is absolutely paramount. Now, the next guy I want to talk about on the offensive side of the ball is actually going to be another offensive lineman. That's going to be Daniel Brunskill. Now, look, I know Daniel Brunskill isn't the best player by any means, but to me, his biggest value is in his ability to play multiple positions, in his versatility. He can essentially play any position on the offensive line, and I think if we sign him to a 2-year deal to essentially be that sixth man, where, let's say, should anyone get hurt, I mean, hopefully not, but should anyone get hurt, he can plug him right in there. He has a ton of starting experience, played a ton of snaps, so he's not going to come in and just ruin the game for you. Now, moving on to the defensive side of the ball of the players who I think we should bring back. To me, my offseason priority number one is probably DJ Jones and Arden Key. However, I actually don't think we're going to bring back either of those. I just think on the open market, those guys are going to command crazy money, which is definitely going to be a bummer to lose both of those guys, but it should result in some decent compensatory picks next year, maybe a 3rd or 4th round pick, so at least there's a silver lining to that. So the guys who I actually would bring back in this mock offseason, number one, it's going to be K'Wan Williams. I'm a big fan of K'Wan. I think in the slot, he's an excellent cornerback. The front office and the franchise really think highly of K'Wan. So I think he comes back, maybe a 2-year deal, and it really just helps to solidify the secondary. The next guy I want to bring back is going to be rotational edge rusher Jordan Willis. So Willis really started coming on once he came back from his suspension, and towards the end of the year, it's kind of like similar to Samson Ebukam, but because he missed the beginning of the season, it took him a while to kind of get up to speed with everything. But down the stretch, he made some big plays, and of course had that massive play on special teams against the Packers where he blocked the punt. Now, the last guy, this is going to be somewhat controversial because I know Niner fans want to move on from him, but I don't. And that's going to be safety Jaquiski Tartt. So I think we bring him back on a 1 to 2 year deal for actually a pretty cheap deal. Now, there's rumors that he might go out into free agency, and of course he will, but that he might earn a decent sized contract. Well, I actually tend to disagree with that. Now, I could be wrong, but I tend to disagree with that a little bit simply because the safety free agent market is loaded. You have Tyrann Mathieu, you have Marcus Williams, you have who else is out there? Justin Reed, you have Terrell Edmonds, you have Tracy Walker, Quandre Diggs. Then you have all these guys in the draft too. So Kyle Hamilton, Jaquan Brisker, Daxton Hill, Jalen Petrie. So considering that safety isn't the most valued position in the NFL and you have all these other options, I think that Jaquiski Tartt is not going to maybe make the money that his agent or he believes he will. So at the end of the day, I think we bring back Jaquiski Tartt and we keep that secondary together. The secondary can be somewhat like the offensive line, where when you just have that great communication, it really helps out just knowing how to react to like the different offensive plays and offensive schemes. Now, is Jaquiski Tartt a Pro Bowler? Absolutely not. But I think if we bring him back in a reasonable contract, draft a safety in the draft, and then bring them along, and I think we could be set up really nicely in the secondary. Now we're going to move on to a very exciting part of the video, and that's going to be my free agent additions, the part of the video that I'm sure a lot of you guys came here to tune in for. So these guys, I want to preface by saying that I wanted to sign a couple of guys who are going to be here on 1 to 2 year deals. We're not going to break the bank, and ideally, if we're drafting well, then our draft picks can essentially take over for these guys down the road. So the first guy we're going to talk about is going to be on the offensive side of the ball, and that's going to be Marquez Valdes-Scantling, formerly of the Green Bay Packers. Now, MVS is 27 years old. He's 6'4", 206, so still relatively young, and he's got excellent size. Now, Jawan Jennings has really good size, who we did bring back, but think about this with MVS. He ran a 4.37 40, so he's got lightning quick speed. I think with Trey Lance's arm, he could be a down-the-field threat, really open things up underneath for guys like Deebo and Arik and Jawan and Kittle when they do all their crossing routes and a bunch of the different concepts that we run. If we can have MVS just tear it down the field, wow. And we can get those big plays, too, that we've been really lacking, just those deep passes that we just didn't really see a whole lot of with Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, let me throw a couple of numbers at you about MVS, which I think are really impressive. So, he has a career 17.5 yards per catch average. That's insane. I think it was in 2020, he averaged almost 21 yards per catch. So, he is definitely a down-the-field threat. Not only that, last season, 2021, he had 0 drops. The year before, he had a few, but last year, 0 drops, so that's really good to see. And then in 131 career touches in the regular season, not counting the playoffs, he only had 1 fumble. So he's definitely somewhat reliable with the ball too. He's been very consistent in his time with Green Bay. I think, he's done a lot in Green Bay, they've won a lot of games. So I think he understands the importance of going to a team where he has a chance to do really well in terms of winning, getting to the playoffs, and possible Super Bowl contention, which would absolutely be the case here in San Francisco. And I think he just really helps to round out the wide receiver room really well. When you have Deebo, Arik, Jawan, now you bring in MVS, that's a pretty special group right there. Couple that with Trey Lance just airing it out and really coming on as a passer, I think it could be a really good group, and it will come at a reasonable deal as well. After that, I want to talk about edge rusher Dante Fowler Jr. I think we could bring him on a 1-year deal. I think he could be looking to go to a place to increase his value. And I think we are the perfect spot for that, where he can play here for a year and then go off and earn yet another big contract, similar to what he did his last year in LA with the Rams. Then he goes to Atlanta and earns a big contract. He's still relatively young. He's only 28 years old, or he will be 28 by the start of the season. He's a great scheme fit. He's someone who, when you think about it, he's not the main guy to get after the quarterback. Like, I don't think Dante Fowler should be like the number one guy. So when you look at the Rams, of course, Aaron Donald was the guy right there. Now, when you come to San Francisco, of course, Nick Bosa is the guy who, garners most of the focus for the opposing offense. So when you have Bosa and Armstead and all these other guys, Kinlaw, Ebukam, you throw in a guy like Dante Fowler, I think he could have a massive season, and I really think he could be a huge difference maker. Now, you might ask yourself, well, why would we not just bring back Arden Key? Well, I think Arden Key, his big thing is that he'll be looking for a multi-year deal with big money, whereas I think Fowler, we can bring him in on a one-year deal. He comes in, and then hopefully we continue to see the development of Ebukam and Willis and Omenahu, and then they can just seamlessly take over for the snaps that Fowler would have taken. So I think this would be an excellent move for the defense, and I think it would really help get after like the talented quarterbacks that we just play year in and year out, especially in our division with Stafford and Kyler Murray. Last but not least, I want to bring in some secondary help, and I'm going to be looking at cornerback Bryce Callahan. Now, I think we could bring him in on a 2-year contract. I think it'd be a very reasonable contract. He's 5'10", 185 pounds, so solid size. I think he's about 31 years old, so he has a ton of experience playing in the NFL, and he's a much, much better player at this point compared to Josh Norman, let's say, last year. So should anything happen to Emmanuel Mosley or Ambry Thomas, I think Callahan could come in immediately and do a very solid job. He's also very versatile too. He can play on the inside at the slot, or he can play on the outside on the edge against like those X and Y receivers. So I think there's a lot of different options that Bryce Callahan gives us should anyone get hurt, or when teams go to that like 4 wide receiver set. Maybe you have Mosley and Thomas on the edge and Kwan and Callahan in the slot. So a lot of great options here. I think he's a vet presence too. So Mosley has been around for a little bit, but he's still relatively young. Ambry Thomas still very young. So Callahan could be that veteran presence that we have in the locker room as well. And last but not least, I think what could be really, really interesting is my prediction is after this season, I think that D'Amico Ryans gets a head coaching job, and I think we look to bring Vic Fangio back to San Francisco after that. And Bryce Callahan has played with Fangio for years and years, and that could ultimately help the transition, if we're thinking a little bit long term, to Vic Fangio. I know it sounds a little crazy, but that's what be another minor benefit to bring in a guy like Callahan. But as you can see, these are my free agent moves, and again, just not breaking the bank on anyone. I think the bigger, more important thing is to focus on drafting well, bringing guys who play specific roles and fill specific needs that we're lacking, and I think these 3 guys do all of that. And last but not least, the last segment that we're going to move into is going to be the draft, and that's going to be a whole lot of fun, so stay tuned for that.